You are not the prisoner who panicked in the dark. You are the one whose eyes still sting from smoke and blinding sunlight, standing at the mouth of the cave with cold stone under your bare feet and dust in your throat. Sit with that for a second. Because most people hear Plato's cave like it's some old classroom story, neat and harmless, something to nod at and move on from. But this is a map of what happens when your discernment wakes up before the people around you are ready for it. In Plato's Republic, Socrates gives you that image for a reason. Prisoners chained from birth, necks fixed, legs fixed, facing a wall so long that the wall becomes their whole world. No window, no turning around, no second angle, just the scrape of chains, the smell of heated rock, the flicker moving across stone. And they call that reality because they have never been given anything else. Now here's where it gets dangerous. Behind them, a fire burns, just firelight. And between that fire and those chained people, unseen figures carry objects back and forth so their shadows stretch across the wall. That's the setup. That's the system. That's why this hits so hard. The prisoners don't know they're watching copies of copies. They don't know their certainty was arranged for them. They don't know somebody else is managing the image while they argue over whose shadow is truest. And if that sounds familiar, it should. Because when you've lived inside a false picture long enough, even a lie can start to feel like home. That's why the ones still loyal to the wall get nervous around you. They may laugh, they may shrug, they may act like you're doing too much, but pay attention. They're watching, secretly watching, because something in your spirit already knows what theirs is trying not to admit. If there is a fire behind the image, then the image is not the source. And if the image is not the source, then everything built on it starts shaking. That's the hidden terror. Not that you asked a question, but that you might keep turning. And the wild part is, in this story, awakening does not begin with peace. It begins with interruption. One prisoner is unchained, just one. The moment comes when somebody is forced to move, forced to turn, forced to face what was always there behind them. And when that happens in Plato's cave, the first thing he feels is not relief, it's pain. If this is already hitting something deep in you, make sure you subscribe and like this video, because what happens when he turns toward that fire is where the real shaking starts. And that pain matters more than most people realize, because in this place, the first wound of awakening is not the chain coming off. It's the turn. Number 1. The turn is what exposes how deep the deception goes. In the cave, the prisoner does not rise into wisdom all at once. He is unchained first, and then he has to turn his whole body toward the fire that had been behind him the entire time. Think about that. The heat was always there. The crackle was always there. The smell of ash, the dry air, the flicker against the stone. All of it existed while he kept staring at the wall. That is how false reality works. It does not always hide by disappearing. Sometimes it hides by becoming background. And when you finally turn toward what was shaping your world, your eyes don't celebrate. They ache. They water. They resist. So when people act shocked that your awakening season came with confusion, grief, and discomfort, they are telling on themselves. They only respect truth when it arrives without a cost. Now notice something even heavier. The fire is not the highest truth. It is only the first exposure. But to the prisoner, that first sight feels brutal enough. He had spent his whole life reading shadows as substance, so when he sees the objects near the flame, his mind has to admit something humiliating. What he defended was never the thing itself. It was a projection, a shape, a moving copy on a wall. And that's why some people become defensive the moment you start discerning patterns they still call normal. Your clarity bothers them because it reminds them how much of their confidence is built on second-hand images. They do not want to know what is holding the object, what casts the outline, who arranged the scene. They just want the wall to stay convincing. And let me say this plain. In Plato's cave, the prisoner does not look strong when this starts. He looks disoriented, slow, awkward. His old certainty is gone, but his new sight is not settled yet. That in-between place is where most people misjudge the chosen ones. They see you blinking and think you're broken. They see you go quiet and think you've lost direction. No, you are adjusting. You are developing unchained sight. You are learning that discernment makes you clumsy before it makes you powerful. Because the eyes that worshipped appearances have to die before real vision can live. But here's where this story stops being a lesson and starts becoming a warning. Because just when the prisoner begins to make out the objects by the fire, he finds out the flame was never the destination. Someone takes hold of him, and the next movement is harder than the first. Ahead of him is rough ground, narrow footing, and the beginning of the steep ascent. And this is where a lot of people misunderstand the story, because the climb out is not gentle, and it is not glamorous. Number 2, the path to real sight feels cruel before it feels clear. In Plato's cave, once the prisoner has turned and begun to see more than the wall, he is not left there to settle in comfortably by the fire. He is dragged upward, up rough ground, up through a narrow way, up where the air changes and the darkness thins. You can almost hear it, can't you? Sand grinding under his heels, breath going ragged in his chest, hands brushing against cold rock that scrapes the skin. This is the part people never celebrate when they talk about awakening. They want revelation without dislocation. They want discernment without loss. But the story will not let you fake it. If you are being pulled out of what once defined your whole reality, of course it feels violent to your old self. Of course it feels lonely. Of course it feels like something is being taken from you. Because it is. And that is exactly why the watchers inside the cave keep misreading your isolation. They think your distance means you fell off. They think your silence means confusion won. They think if you're not performing for the wall anymore, then you must be lost. But the truth is harder and holier than that. You are on the steep ascent. You are between worlds. Too awake to relax in the old picture, not yet adjusted to the full brightness ahead. That middle stretch is brutal. There is no applause there, no smooth language. No crowd saying, yes, keep going. Just pressure, friction, and the strange ache of leaving behind what once felt normal. That is why so many turn back in spirit, even if the chain is already off. They miss the predictability of shadow and firelight. They miss the comfort of a life that never asked them to widen their vision. But the one being pulled upward in this story keeps going, even in pain. That matters. Because awakening is not proven when you ask one bold question. It is proven when you keep moving after the question ruins your old answers. And outside that opening, beyond that dim mouth of stone, there is something the cave-trained eye cannot yet bear. At first, he does not see truth in its fullness. He sees flashes, harshness, a brightness that feels almost offensive. He wants to retreat because that's what the unready mind does when reality stops coming in familiar shapes. Then comes the next shock. Not the wall, not the fire, not even the climb, but the humiliating fact that once he reaches the outside, he still cannot see clearly. And that, right there, is the part that humbles you. Because getting out does not mean you can suddenly handle what is outside. Number 3, truth often arrives in layers, so your soul does not shatter under the weight of it. Once the prisoner reaches the opening, he doesn't step into instant mastery. He flinches, he squints, his eyes burn under blinding sunlight, and everything that should be freedom feels unbearable at first. The air is wider, colder, cleaner. There is no cave echo now, no close stone wall throwing sound back at him. Instead, there is open space, raw brightness, and a world too large for his old vision. That matters, because some of you thought awakening would make you feel powerful on day one. You thought discernment would come with confidence, smooth words, and a perfect sense of direction. But this story says otherwise. First comes exposure. First comes weakness. First comes the shaking of every sense that learned to live in confinement. So he has to begin small. He doesn't start with the sun or some grand revelation he can name and hold and explain to everybody else. He starts with what he can bear: reflections in water, faint outlines, the edges of things, a shape before a meaning, a glimmer before a certainty. And if you've been in that season where you only caught fragments, where your spirit knew something was changing before your mind could fully speak it, then you already understand the mercy in that. Full clarity would have crushed the version of you that still needed healing. So the truth came to you in pieces. A pattern here, a contradiction there, a feeling in your gut you could not shake. That was training. And while all of this is happening, the ones still below would call it weakness if they saw it. They would say, "Look at him now, outside all that time and he still can't even see straight." That's how shadowbound people judge awakening. They measure higher sight by old standards. They expect a transformed soul to perform instantly. They do not understand that unchained sight has to strengthen slowly. It has to learn depth. It has to stop confusing brightness with danger just because darkness used to feel familiar. So if your growth looked messy, if your discernment came through tears, distance, awkward silence, or long, lonely recalibration, hear me clearly. That was your vision being rebuilt. And then, after reflection, after outline, after object, comes the moment this whole journey has been moving toward: beyond the fire, beyond the climb, beyond the first fragments outside, something greater, something so central that once he finally looks toward it, every shadow he ever trusted is exposed at once. The sun is next. And when the sun finally enters the story, everything before it gets put in its proper place. Number 4, the highest truth does not just brighten your vision. It rearranges your whole understanding of what vision even is. Out there, beyond the cave mouth, the prisoner at last lifts his eyes far enough, long enough, to face what had been impossible before. The fire that once felt overwhelming, the reflections that trained him in stages, the sun itself. And when he sees it, he understands that this is not just another object inside the world. This is what makes the world visible. This is what lets forms be seen, what gives shape its outline, what lets life stand out instead of dissolve into dimness. That realization is bigger than information. It is order. It is source. It is the collapse of every smaller light he once thought was enough. That is why awakening can feel so lonely, because once you have encountered what is real at that level, You cannot sincerely go back to worshiping substitutes. You can still remember them. You can still understand why they once impressed you, but they no longer own your sight. And that shift scares people who are still trying to measure everything by what they can control. Because now your discernment is not coming from the wall, or the crowd, or the voices managing shadow and firelight. It is coming from something higher, something they cannot edit for you. That is when they start watching harder, quietly, closely. Not because they think you are weak, but because they sense you are no longer feeding on the same illusions they are. And let me press this into your spirit. The prisoner is made responsible by this sight. Real clarity does not puff you up, it sobers you. It shows you how little you knew when you were arguing over outlines. It shows you how much of your old certainty was built in confinement. It shows you that discernment is not a costume you put on to feel special. It is a burden of honesty. Once he has seen what lights everything else, he cannot pretend the cave is complete. He cannot call shadow and firelight the whole story anymore, not without betraying what his own eyes now know. And here is where Plato's cave turns from revelation into calling. Because the moment he truly sees, the question changes from, can I get free? To, what do I do with sight now that I have it? That is where many people want the story to end. In the open air, under the warmth of the sun, far from chains, far from noise. But that is not where it ends. Not even close. Because higher sight does not erase the memory of those still facing the wall. And the next move he makes is the one almost nobody would choose on their own. He turns back toward the dark. And that turn toward the dark is where the story stops flattering you and starts testing you. Number 5. Real awakening is proven by what you do after you can finally see. It would have been easy for the freed man to stay outside. Easy to keep his face lifted, his eyes warmed, his body far from the scrape of chains and the stale heat of that old chamber. But in Plato's cave, sight is not given just for private comfort. Once he understands what the sun is, once he knows the fire was only a lesser light, and the wall only a screen for secondhand images, he cannot unknow it. And that kind of knowing creates a burden. The burden of being responsible. So he goes back. Feel the weight of that. He leaves the open air and walks down again. The ground narrows. The clean brightness fades. The smell changes first. Dust, smoke, that trapped dryness of a place where nothing fresh moves freely. Then the sound changes. The cave starts catching every footstep, tossing it back at him in thin little echoes. His eyes, which had learned the wide world, now struggle in the dimness. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of the whole allegory. People think if you carry truth, you should glide through every room with perfect confidence. But one who has seen more may stumble hardest when forced back into a place built for less. And some of you know that feeling better than you wish you did. You return to old conversations, old expectations, old systems of approval, and suddenly you seem awkward there, slower there. You don't laugh at the same things. You don't argue over the same shadows. You do not move by the same rhythm. Then the secret watchers take notes. They whisper to themselves, see, this new awareness made them strange. But your worth did not change. Your eyesight did. Darkness now asks more of you than light does. That is not failure. That is evidence. Here's the deeper sting. The people still chained will not read his struggle with compassion. They will read it as proof against the higher world. His blinking will become their argument. His hesitation will become their comfort. Because if the returned man cannot see well in their darkness, then they can pretend the darkness is safer than the sun. That's how illusion defends itself. It turns your adjustment into its excuse. So now he is back among the wall gazers, carrying a reality they have never touched, breathing the old smoke again, trying to speak from awakened sight while his eyes still strain in the gloom. And the ones facing the stone are about to do exactly what fear always does when truth walks into the room. And the room does what rooms built on illusion always do. It pushes back the moment truth walks in. Number 6. The cave protects itself by ridiculing the one who sees. When the returned man starts speaking, he is met with eyes that narrow, mouths that curl, bodies that stay fixed toward the wall. The fire still burns behind them, and the shadows still move, and that is enough for them. They do not want the source. They want the show. So when he tries to explain the sun, or the climb, or the life beyond the opening, the first answer he gets is mockery. Not because his words are weak, but because their world is. Plato's cave cannot survive direct light, so it tries to laugh at the hand that brings it. And this is where your spirit needs to stay awake, because the same thing happens when you stop performing for a crowd that only trusts shadows. The moment you change, they start grading your pain. They watch your eyes, your pauses, your silence, and they decide your adjustment means you were never right to begin with. But that is a cheap trick, and you need to see it for what it is. Their laughter is defense. They are protecting the wall because the wall has made them comfortable, predictable, and safe from the cost of turning around. If your discernment exposes that, then of course they will call you confusing. Of course they will say you changed too much. Of course they will prefer the version of you that stayed dim. That is why the returned prisoner does not win them over by being smooth. He cannot. Unchained sight is not made for pleasing the chained. It is made for telling the truth even while your own eyes are still adjusting to the dark. So he stands there, awkward and blinking, carrying a reality they have not earned yet, and every stumble only proves how unnatural the cave has become to him. The watchers below hear that as weakness. Heaven hears it as evidence. And now the tension tightens, because the more he speaks, the more obvious it becomes that the prisoners are not just unwilling to listen, they are invested in not hearing him. Some of them are watching him like he is a warning. Some are waiting for him to fail so they can feel safe again. And one of them, sitting closest to the wall, has just gone very still. And that stillness is never random, because in Plato's cave, the first person to stop laughing is usually the one whose own fear just got touched. Number 7. The strongest lie in the room is always the one that looks normal. The man at the wall is not shouting yet. He is not arguing yet. He is just sitting there, face pale in the firelight, eyes fixed on the shadows, like he has heard something inside himself and does not want it answered. That is how the cave works. It does not always attack you with noise. Sometimes it goes quiet. Sometimes it lets one chain-rattled soul sense the crack before anyone else does. And the watchers around him feel it too, even if they cannot name it. They feel the room shift. They feel the old order wobble. That is why they keep their eyes forward. If they turn, they risk losing the story they have lived in for so long. You need to understand this part because this is where unchained sight starts doing its real work. It is about making the old room impossible to trust. The returned man is standing there, blinking in the dark, and every second he stays honest, makes the cave feel smaller. That is why they are so quick to mock him. Not because his words are empty, but because his presence is dangerous. He is proof that the wall is not the world. He is proof that shadow and firelight can be arranged, repeated, and sold as truth. And once one prisoner starts noticing that, every other prisoner has to decide whether to stay comfortable or to turn. But listen, the one closest to the wall has gone still for another reason. He is weighing it. You can almost feel the friction in him. Old certainty on one side, the first sting of discernment on the other. That is a terrifying place to be, because once the mind knows a thing might be false, it can never fully unknow it. The cave hates that moment. It hates hesitation more than outrage. Outrage can be managed. Hesitation is where awakening enters. It is the small crack where the whole system starts leaking. So now the room is split in a way nobody expected. The loud ones are still laughing. The quiet one is listening. And the returned man, standing between the wall and the fire, knows exactly what that means. Because if that one turns his head even once, the whole story begins to change. And once that crack appears, the whole chamber becomes dangerous in a new way. Not because the wall changed, but because somebody finally suspects it. Number 8. Awakening often begins as hesitation before it becomes movement. The quiet prisoner has not turned yet. His chains still hold him. His face is still aimed at the same stone as everyone else. But now there is a delay in him, a tiny pause between the passing shadow and his agreement with it. That pause is everything. You need to hear me on this. The old order can survive mockery because mockery keeps the eyes forward. It can survive noise because noise keeps people busy. What it struggles to survive is inward doubt. The moment a soul starts wondering, what if this isn't all there is? The wall loses a piece of its spell. You have seen this in your own life, even if you didn't have words for it at the time. It was that strange moment when the thing everybody called normal stopped feeling solid. Same room, same routine, same voices. But something in you no longer landed on the image the way it used to. You could still hear it, still see it, still participate in it on the surface. Yet your spirit had begun pulling back. That is what is happening to him now. The returned man does not need to force the chain loose with argument. His testimony has already done something more unsettling. It has introduced friction into certainty. And the others feel it. Oh, they feel it. The secret watchers in that room are sharper than they look. They notice when one of their own stops reacting on cue. They notice the still shoulders, the longer breath, the slight turn of attention away from the performance. That is why pressure in the cave starts building fast. Not because truth has fully won, but because the management of appearances depends on instant agreement. If one prisoner begins to hesitate, another might start listening. If another starts listening, somebody may try to turn. And once turning starts, the whole arrangement gets exposed from the inside out. That is why the returned man has to be careful here, not timid. He is standing between the fire and the chained, between what is staged and what is possible. And he knows one wrong move could harden the room again. Too much force, and they will call him mad. Too much silence, and the moment may pass. So he speaks into that pause, not to entertain the loud ones or win applause. He speaks for the one whose soul has just begun to outgrow the wall. And then it happens. Just the smallest movement, not freedom yet or a full turning. A chin lifting, a shoulder tightening, an ear leaning back toward the heat behind him. And suddenly, every watcher in the cave knows this has gone too far. And the moment that tiny movement happens, the whole balance of the cave gets exposed. Number 9. The system is never most threatened by a rebel at the edge. It is threatened by a believer in the center who starts to question. The returned man already left. He already climbed. He already saw. But the chained one near the wall? That one matters now, because his hesitation is happening inside the old order, right in the middle of its rhythm. His chin lifts a little more. His breath catches. He is still facing forward, but not fully the way he was before. And the others feel it with that strange instinct people have when somebody near them is about to stop agreeing. The cave grows tense. The fire still flickers. The shadows still glide across the stone. Yet the room no longer feels settled. It feels watched from within. This is why people who secretly depend on illusion become so aggressive when one person near them begins to wake up. They can tolerate your distance. They can explain away your isolation. They can mock your silence and call your discernment a phase. But when somebody still sitting in the row begins to doubt what the row is for, panic starts whispering. Because now the issue is not your testimony anymore. Now the issue is spread. Now the issue is contagion. Awakening, in a place like this, moves first through attention. One person notices. Another senses the noticing. Then the whole arrangement starts straining to keep everyone looking where they were told to look. And the man who returned understands that better than anybody in the room. He does not need applause from the loud ones. He does not need quick agreement from the ones smirking at the wall. What he needs is for that one fragile crack to stay open long enough for real discernment to enter. So he speaks again, but not harder, clearer. He speaks of the fire without worshiping it. He speaks of the climb without hiding the pain. He speaks of the world beyond without dressing it up like some fantasy. No performance, no begging, just reality, offered to somebody whose soul has begun to suspect that shadow and firelight are not enough. And that is exactly when the room reacts. The mockery sharpens. The voices grow faster. A few chained heads start talking over him, not because they have new insight, but because noise is how fear tries to regain control. The quiet prisoner flinches. His shoulder pulls tight. For 1 second, it looks like he might sink back into the wall and pretend none of this ever touched him. But then, he does something even more dangerous than asking a question. He tries to turn. And that attempt is enough to reveal what this place was really protecting all along. Number 10. The chains are not only on the body, they are wrapped around permission. The prisoner who starts to turn does not suddenly become free. He strains, his neck resists, his shoulders pull against what has held him in one position for so long. Even that tiny effort costs him. You can hear the scrape, the short breath, the dry swallow in his throat as he tries to shift toward the heat behind him. And the moment he does, the room reacts like a single nervous body. Not because he escaped, but because he dared to try. That is what exposes the deeper truth of the cave. The system was never satisfied with your compliance on the outside. It wanted your inner agreement, too. It wanted you to feel that turning was unthinkable. This is why so many people get angry the second someone near them starts asking real questions. I mean the kind that puts pressure on the whole arrangement, not polite or decorative curiosity. The kind that makes people look at what they were told not to inspect. In that space, the loud prisoners are not defending truth. They are defending habit. They are defending identity. They are defending the fragile comfort of knowing where to look and what to call real without ever testing it for themselves. So when this chained man begins to move, their mockery turns sharper, more desperate. You can almost feel it in the stale air, the fast talking, the nervous laughter, the forced certainty. Secret watchers become open enforcers when the wall starts losing its hold. And yet, something sacred is happening right there in the strain. The returned man sees it immediately. He knows this because he lived it. He knows that awakening does not begin when you have answers. It begins when obedience to the old picture starts cracking. That trembling effort, that awkward half turn, matters more than any speech. Why? Because it is personal now. No one can do this part for him. No one can borrow sight on his behalf. No one can outsource discernment. He must feel the discomfort himself. He must discover with his own body that the wall was not all there was. But here comes the cruel part. The first thing he is going to meet is the fire. Harsh, close, and painful. Not the sun, freedom, or peace. The lower light comes before the higher one. The rough truth comes before the radiant truth. And that is exactly where many people freeze. They begin to turn, they feel the sting, and they mistake the sting for proof that they should stop. The room is counting on that. The watchers are counting on that. They want the pain of first exposure to send him right back into position. His head is turning now, just enough for the first glare to hit his eyes. And that first glare is where almost everyone misreads the process. Because the pain of early sight feels so offensive that you want to call it wrong. Number 11. The first light you meet after deception is confrontational. The chained man finally pulls far enough to catch the fire with the edge of his vision, and it hurts. His eyes pinch shut. His face twists. The heat that once sat behind him as background now feels harsh, too close, almost insulting. Smoke stings his nose. The air near the flame is drier, sharper. He is not looking at freedom yet. He is looking at the lower light that made the whole wall performance possible. And this is where so many people turn back in spirit. They say, "This feels terrible, so it must be false." No, sometimes it feels terrible because it is the first honest thing your senses have touched in a very long time. You need to understand how deep this goes. The fire is not the final truth, but it is the first exposure of the setup. Until now, he only knew the moving outlines in front of him. Now, through the ache, he begins to realize there is a source behind the effect. There is a mechanism behind the meaning he used to swallow without question. That is a brutal moment, because once you know there is something behind the image, you can never again pretend the image made itself. That is why the watchers get louder when someone begins to see even this much. They are not afraid only of the sun out there. They are afraid of the simple, devastating discovery that the wall was curated. And the man who returned recognizes the moment immediately. He does not rush it. He does not try to flatter the one turning. He knows discernment cannot be forced past its own threshold. So he lets the pain do its work. He lets the eyes water. He lets the soul feel the insult of realizing how long it was managed by secondhand appearances. Because this is sacred too, though not pleasant. The first sting of truth strips a person of fake certainty faster than 100 speeches ever could. Meanwhile, the others are watching every flinch. They want this pain to mean failure. They want him to recoil, twist back toward the wall, and call the whole attempt a mistake. If he does that, their world resets. Their mockery wins. Their chains feel wise again. But he doesn't fully turn back. He stays there in the strain, blinking through tears, breathing through heat, trying to hold one more second of sight than his old self can bear. And then, through the blur, he starts to make out something even more dangerous than the flame itself. Shapes moving between the fire and the wall. And those moving shapes are the moment the whole illusion loses its innocence. Number 12. The lie becomes weaker the second you see how it is made. The man straining toward the fire does not yet understand everything, but he understands enough. Through the sting in his eyes, he catches the outline of forms passing between the flame and the wall, hands carrying them, bodies managing the display, motion behind the motion. That changes everything. Because now the shadows are no longer mysterious. They are produced, arranged, repeated on purpose. The wall did not reveal truth to him. It fed him an effect while hiding the cause. And once you see that, even for a heartbeat, you can never fully return to innocent belief. This is why discernment becomes so dangerous to people who survive by appearances. They don't mind you being emotional. They can work with that. They don't even mind you being wounded, as long as your wound keeps you facing the wall. But the moment you start noticing structure, when you see who is carrying what, who benefits from the angle, who stays hidden while everybody else argues over outlines, that is when the whole cave begins trembling. Not because you suddenly became loud, but because you became precise. And precision is terrifying to people who depend on confusion. Feel the scene for what it is. Smoke in the air, heat pressing against the side of his face, chains pulling at his body, while his eyes, still watering, try to hold the image steady. Behind him, the others are still muttering, some mocking, some nervous, some pretending none of this matters. But he knows it matters now. He has seen enough to understand that what looked like reality was curated from a safer distance. That is one of the hardest awakenings there is. Not merely that you were mistaken, but that your mistake was maintained. And listen, this is where many people get tempted to become bitter. They see the setup and they want to rage at the whole chamber. But the returned man does not need rage here. He needs steadiness. Because the one turning is watching him just as much as he is watching the fire. If he panics, the others will call the whole thing madness. If he softens the truth, the moment will lose its force. So he stands there in that ugly, sacred middle ground, carrying clarity without performance. Meanwhile, the prisoner who first hesitated is seeing the same thing now in flashes, dimly, but enough. Enough to feel disgust. Enough to feel grief. Enough to realize that the shadows he once argued over were never the source at all. And once that realization enters a soul, the cave has only two choices left: drive him back to the wall, or let the climb begin. And that is the moment when the cave reveals what it values more than comfort: control. Number 13. Once a soul sees the mechanism, staying the same becomes harder than changing. The prisoner who has caught those moving forms can still retreat, yes. He can still force his head back toward the wall, swallow the shock, and pretend the whole glimpse meant nothing. People do that every day in places like this. They see enough to know something is wrong, then choose numbness because numbness is cheaper than transformation. But now that he has seen the setup, the shadows don't land the same way. They have lost their innocence. They have lost their spell. He cannot watch them now without also sensing the hands behind them, the timing behind them, the quiet arrangement of the scene. That is the beginning of separation, inward. And the room hates that kind of inward separation. You can feel it in the air. The muttering gets harsher. The mockery gets more pointed. The old crowd is no longer only laughing at the returned man. Now they are pressuring the one who turned. That's how control works in a place like this. The moment you stop agreeing automatically, you become a problem. They do not need to strike you. They just need to make truth feel socially expensive. They need to make discernment feel lonely. They need your awakening to look embarrassing. Because if looking back costs too much, most people will shove their own clarity back down and call it maturity. But the returned man knows this pressure too well. He knows the trembling that comes right after the lie breaks. He knows how the body panics when reality asks more of it than performance ever did. So he does not waste breath arguing with the loud ones. He keeps his attention on the one in pain. That is wisdom. In this place, you do not pour your strength into people committed to the wall. You pour it into the soul struggling to leave it. He speaks toward that shaking prisoner with the kind of steadiness only lived truth gives, enough to keep the moment from blurring, not harsh enough to crush him. Just enough to keep him from mistaking pain for danger. Because now, the next step has to happen. Seeing the fire is one thing, seeing the handlers is another, but neither is freedom. Freedom begins when the body follows the revelation. The chain has to come off, the position has to break, the old angle has to be abandoned. And in Plato's cave, that shift is never casual. It means losing your place in the row. It means leaving the wall that once organized your whole reality. It means stepping into uncertainty with no applause, no crowd, no guarantee that your eyes will thank you anytime soon. The prisoner is breathing hard now. His head is turned. His certainty is gone. And somewhere in that smoky half-light, something starts to loosen. And when something finally loosens, that is when the whole room understands. This is no longer just a conversation. Number 14. The moment your position breaks, people who loved your predictability start panicking. The chain on the turning prisoner gives a little, enough for his body to shift away from the wall that once held all his attention. You can hear the metal drag against stone, that hard scraping sound that cuts through the muttering in the cave. His balance is off. His legs, trained for stillness, do not know what to do with movement yet. His breathing goes uneven. He looks weak by cave standards, awkward, unsteady. And that, right there, is where illusion makes its last cheap argument. It points at the trembling of transition and calls it proof you should have stayed bound. You have seen this before, maybe in yourself, maybe in somebody whose awakening made a whole room nervous. The second they stop fitting the old role, everybody suddenly becomes an expert on why they are unstable. Why? Because your old role served the cave. Your silence served it. Your fixed gaze served it. Your automatic agreement served it. But once you begin shifting, once your discernment starts affecting your position and not just your thoughts, then the watchers lose something they counted on. They lose access to your old obedience. And people do not always react kindly when access begins to slip. The returned man does not rush to make the moment look pretty. He cannot. There is nothing pretty about coming loose from a lifetime of alignment with the wall. The prisoner turning is clumsy because he is real. His first movements are uneven because this is not performance. This is the body learning what the soul has already suspected, that freedom feels unnatural before it feels holy. So the one who came back keeps speaking into the chaos with grounded clarity. He does not waste time defending himself to the loud ones. He knows their noise is only fear wearing a bigger voice. His attention stays where the real battle is, on the one separating from the row. And now the stakes rise again, because the chain coming loose is not the end. It only creates the next terror. Once the body is no longer fixed, the prisoner has to decide whether to go farther. He has seen the fire. He has seen the carriers. He has felt the shame of realizing how managed the wall really was. But none of that guarantees he will leave. Plenty of people wake up just enough to become miserable, then choose a more comfortable version of captivity. They loosen, but they do not climb. The smoke is thicker near the flame. The heat is sharper. The room behind him is angry. The path ahead is narrow, rough, and unfamiliar. And for the first time in his life, he has to choose whether he will trust the wall he knows or the opening he cannot yet understand. And that loosening is where the real decision finally steps out of theory and into the body. Number 15. Awakening stops being a thought the moment your feet have to move. The prisoner, who has turned enough to see the setup, is no longer trapped in pure argument. He is at that terrible threshold where knowing and choosing meet. The wall is still there, familiar as breath. The voices behind him are still throwing their hooks. Ridicule, urgency, fake certainty, all of it. The fire is close enough now to make his skin feel hot on one side and cold on the other. Smoke catches in his throat. The stone under him is uneven. Nothing about this feels inspiring. And that is exactly why this moment matters. Because truth is not proven when it sounds profound. It is proven when, in the middle of discomfort, you still step away from what you now know is false. You know that moment too, whether you call it that or not. It is when discernment costs you the role that used to keep you safe. It is when you cannot go back to agreeing with the wall without betraying what your own eyes have already seen. That is why so many people stall here, because this part hurts. The old row still offers belonging. The old gaze still offers routine. Even illusion can feel tender when it is familiar. But the opening asks for something the wall never asked for: trust without immediate comfort. It asks you to leave before you feel ready. It asks you to move while your vision is still incomplete. And the watchers know it. Oh, they know it. That is why they get loudest right before the step. They sense that once this prisoner leaves his fixed position, their influence over him weakens. Once he stops measuring reality by the wall, their commentary starts losing weight. So they rush him with panic disguised as reason. Stay where you are. Don't make this awkward. Don't overreact. Don't ruin what everybody else has learned to live with. But those voices are not trying to protect him. They are trying to preserve the arrangement that depended on his stillness. The one who returned does not argue with them anymore. He has already learned something the cave-trained mind hates. Not every voice deserves equal attention when your soul is trying to wake up. So he keeps his eyes on the turning man and guides him toward the narrow way with clarity. Past the fire, past the handlers, toward the rough path cut upward through the dark stone. The steep ascent is waiting there, not decorated, not softened, just real. And for a long second, the prisoner freezes at the first incline, because freedom from the wall is one thing, but climbing toward a light you still cannot bear is something else entirely. Then, with the cave roaring behind him and the opening ahead like a wound in the rock, he lifts one shaking foot and places it on the path. And once that foot lands on the path, the cave starts losing him in ways the row cannot stop. Number 16. The first real victory is refusing to hand your sight back to the ones behind you when they do not understand you. The turning prisoner does not become strong all at once. He wobbles. He catches himself on rough stone. His breath comes sharp, like the air itself is too thin for what his body is trying to become. Behind him, the old voices keep firing. Some mock. Some plead. Some act offended, as if his movement is somehow a betrayal of everybody who stayed facing the wall. But listen carefully. That noise matters less now, not because it vanished, but because distance has started doing holy work. Every step up the incline weakens the wall's power to tell him what he is seeing. Every step up the incline makes the old certainty sound smaller. This is what so many people never understand about awakening. They think the breakthrough is the argument. The breakthrough is the separation. It is the moment you keep moving while confusion still rings in your ears. It is the moment you let your old labels fall behind you instead of turning around to collect them. In this place, the prisoner climbing does not yet have full vision. He still has smoke in his lungs. He still remembers the handlers, the fire, the row, the fixed gaze. But something decisive has happened anyway. He has crossed from managed perception into chosen movement. And once that happens, the cave can still insult you, but it cannot define you the same way. The returned man stays close, not dragging him this time, not forcing him, just guiding him through the dark cut in the stone. That matters too. There is a difference between control and witness. The old setup arranged images for people who never got to turn. This guide does something entirely different. He walks beside a soul that must awaken with his own eyes. The climb is ugly. Knees hit rock. Palms scrape the wall. The air shifts little by little from hot smoke to something cooler, cleaner, unfamiliar. And then comes the strangest part of all. The farther they go, the less impressive the cave sounds. Those voices that once felt absolute begin to flatten into echo. The wall loses authority before it even loses visibility. Now the opening is ahead again. No rumor this time. No somebody else's testimony. A real cut of brightness spilling down into the passage. At first, it is only a pale wash on the stone. Then more. A wider glow. A pressure of light that reaches down the tunnel like a hand. The climbing prisoner lifts his face, squints, and stops dead. Because this is no longer fire. This is the first touch of the world beyond the cave, and when it hits his eyes, everything in him knows there will be no honest way back. And that is where the whole meaning of Plato's cave opens wider than the prisoners ever imagined. Because now, there are two men on the path, and the wall behind them is already losing its claim. Number 17. The cave does not end when somebody escapes it. It ends when its power to define reality breaks inside another soul. The first man, the one who came back, does not need the row to applaud him. He does not need the mockers to retract a single word. Their voices are still down there, thin and sharp in the passage, still clinging to shadow and firelight like it can save them from what they refused to see. But their control has already cracked. Why? Because the second prisoner is climbing. He slips, reaching for the stone with shaking hands. His old life keeps calling him backward, yet he climbs. And then it happens. The passage widens just enough for a wash of pale brightness to spill across his face. He jerks, squints, almost turns away, not from disbelief this time, but from the shock of something too pure to negotiate with. The cave taught him to live by outlines. This light does not need outlines to prove itself. It falls on the rock, on his scraped palms, on the dust clinging to his knees, and every part of him knows he is touching a world that does not need the wall's permission to exist. That is the victory. The ones below do not finally agree. The handlers do not step forward and confess. The mockery does not stop. The victory is that reality remains real, even while the cave denies it. So the first man does the only thing a truly awakened soul can do. He keeps going, and he leaves room for the other to do the same, with no dragging now, no speeches, just presence, steady and sure, while the second prisoner inches forward into what once sounded impossible. In that narrow rise between smoke and open air, the old names fall off him before the last links do. Fool, disruptor, ungrateful, deluded. The path does not answer to any of them. Stone does not care what the row called him. Light does not check whether the crowd approved. It simply reaches. By the time they reach the mouth, dawn is already touching the edge of the world. Cool air moves across their faces. Somewhere beyond, water catches the early brightness and throws it back in trembling silver. The man who climbed last does not speak at first. He just stands there with tears in his eyes, not from pain now, but from the strange relief of seeing that the world was never as small as the wall made it seem. A chain can survive on the wrist longer than it survives in the mind. But once your face has felt morning air, even the metal knows it has lost. Behind them, the cave keeps its smoke. Ahead of them, the day keeps widening, and the stone at the entrance holds the night's cold for only a little while longer. If this walk through Plato's cave stayed with you, subscribe and stay close for the next one. And if a line from this found you at the right moment, leave it in the comments.